have enough for at least one of us to be an informant. So feel free if you want to break the ice with a personal story of a time that maybe you said something that you shouldn't have, and maybe someone got in trouble. Maybe, it goes back to you tattletaling on, a sibling or something growing up, something classic like that. Feel free. A little bit about our author. I put it in the chat, and I can put it again if you can't see it, but I will read it here for you. Ruta is the daughter of a Lithuanian refugee. She was born in Michigan, raised in a family of artists, readers, music lovers. She's passionate about the power of history and story to foster global dialogue and connectivity. She's been invited to present at NATO, European Parliament, the US Capitol, the Library of Congress, and embassies worldwide. She was awarded the Rockefeller Foundation's prestigious Bellagio Fellowship for her studies on human resilience. And the New York Times Book Review declared Ruta Sepetys acts as champion of the interstitial people so often ignored, whose populations lost in the cracks of history. From reading interviews with her and listening to podcasts, it really is a driving force for her to talk about the underrepresented people of the world. And she's done this a few times with her historical fiction. And she talks about how a community or a group of people or an entire country that is underrepresented can often go misunderstood. And she feels that, shining a light on what was happening in Romania in 1989. I was a high schooler in that time also, so I could really relate to Christian in this story around the same time, but I just assumed it was all Russia. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't really have all the details. It was like Russia was the big bad growing up in the U.S. That's what we knew, and it was I didn't know all the individual country stories and what else was going on with I'd heard of Ceausescu and stuff, but I didn't really know. So this was really eye-opening for me, and hopefully you gained something from it too. I would love to hear what you thought of the book. If anyone wants to start with the icebreaker or tell us what they thought of the book, maybe you've read other stuff by Ruta that you can refer to, feel free to raise your virtual hand and chime in. I will call on you. Good to see you all here tonight. I know we might have two snitches now, so I'll just put it this way: the first person to raise their hand, I will assume, is not the snitch, is not the one who's selling my secrets to the state. So, there's an incentive right there. You just might as well raise that hand. Right now, I assume it's my wife because her screen is completely blacked out and you can't even really see her name, and so it's like, I feel like she's hiding something, I know she's in the same house, but I don't know what's going on. So that's not going to get her to raise her hand, though. Oh, but Allie's got her hand up. Allie Schilling, talk to us.
See, I'm not the snitch. Life is good. Hello everybody. I'm happy to be here. I didn't really know what to expect. I'd never read this author before. And just went in totally with an open mind about what was going to happen. And I found the history really fascinating. I thought, focusing on this story was a great way to learn about history. Yeah, this is great. I love this. This is a fascinating way to learn. And so then sort of seeing at the end when they had the photos, I thought that was really cool that she had all of these kind of artifacts of the time as well. I found it to be a little repetitive, just in terms of writing style. So I felt like by about halfway through, I was like, yes, you have to whisper. It is, you have to be quiet. I get it. And maybe that was to really drive home that feeling of oppression. I understand why she did it. But I also, so I was a little frustrated with kind of the repetition. I also normally I don't mind a short chapter, but I felt like the chapters were super, super short and I wanted them to be a little bit meatier. So just from a book structure perspective, I wasn't enamored of it, but I thought it was a really fascinating story, and I was happy when he had a happy ending. I was pleasantly surprised because I didn't see that coming. I thought it was going to be really horribly depressing and sad for him.
Thanks, Allie. Couple really interesting points to talk about there. The possibly repetitive style of the writing and the really short chapters. I too thought that it was to enhance this idea of to really feel the tension and the oppression, and to feel like, it's just closing in on you on all sides. And how are you going to, get yourself free from this? So that's a sense that I took from it. As far as the really short chapters, I wonder if this has something to do with Ruta Sepetys. This is considered a YA book, but she definitely is a crossover author, one that is read by not just young adults. So we tend to read about maybe one YA book a year or so at Books and Bars, if you don't count just the graphic novels. But and I don't read a ton other than graphic novels YA outside of Books and Bars. So my experience with it now that my kids are older is only like maybe a book or so a year. So I'm wondering if anyone else can speak to is that a hallmark of many other YA authors, of very short chapters. I mean, it's a shorter book, and it did really fly. I mean, it was a quick read, I felt. I don't know how you guys felt about that, but a couple things to think about. And thank you, Allie. And now we have Rebecca with her hand up. Rebecca.
I am not the informer, but I am recording everything you say.
I'm actually the one recording it, It lets you know that.
I know, but I get to interpret it in my own way. So.
That's right. Yes, Rebecca's notes it's really interesting because that we can refer to the video.
I can
read her notes and then look at the video. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I quite enjoyed this book. I do read YA. I do think short chapters are a part of that. I remember as a kid, I never noticed when chapters started and ended, but my sister always did. So I think some people are very goal driven by, I got to finish the chapter. I got to finish. And for me, that was not ever how I did reading style, but I think it is something they do deliberately. I was disappointed that this one wasn't a true story, because I really wanted this to be a real person. I really wanted, I don't even remember his name now. I got totally invested in the struggle and in the possibility of a whole country changing overnight. And that seemed to me miraculous. And I really wanted it to be true. So then I did read a little bit more about Ruta Sepetys, and I was glad, that she does these kinds of things. But I also was a little sad because I wanted there to be this symbol and this thing. And maybe I just need to do more work and find out, who are the heroes of the revolutions, and, who can I connect with and attach to. But anyway, I do agree with the repetition, Allie, but for me, it did produce the effect I think that Jeff was thinking about of the constraints put on these people in this time, and how they weren't allowed to be human in many ways, and the incredible I'm going to say agony and pathos. I think they're both, but how the family was used against each other. The fact that the mother was the true deceiver in the end, and I just was it struck me that how easily this could happen. I could see it. I could see how easily it could happen. And I think in some ways we are seeing it happen in our own society. In some ways we are letting bad people get away with bad things because I don't know why. But anyway, so that's all my thoughts for now. And
Thanks, Rebecca. You bring up a really interesting point that I also felt a bit of, and that is the push-pull, the tug between fiction and nonfiction. And there are times where I was in Books and Bars has been the biggest defender and proponent of fiction for so many years, and we tend to only do like a little bit of nonfiction each year. With historical fiction, though, you get into this cross of, you want to know, like, did that actually happen? Is this based on truth? And what I know about the author is that she interviewed between 90 to 100 different Romanian people that lived during this time, and got their stories. And then she looked at things that were commonalities across the board. And one of the things that kept coming up was there would be people talking about, like, my grandparent was the strongest, or the one who really resisted. Everyone thinks it was the youth, but no, you wouldn't believe how strong my grandfather was. And so she knew that she had to, for instance, do a character like the grandfather in this story, because a high percentage of people, of these 90 to 100 Romanians, had that personal experience that they could talk about, of their different oldest living relatives were the ones that were really standing up and fighting against this. So I do think that there is a lot of it that is directly taken from interviews that she did with people, and then the names are changed and stuff. But I definitely get that. And oddly enough, the older I get, it's like in the same way that I really appreciate a good documentary now. And there are times where I'm like, you know what, that movie was good, but I'm sure the documentary is even more interesting, because, I'd almost rather see like the 8-part, in-depth docu-series on it, because it'll show me like the whole story, and not just like, the slick fictionalized version where it's been maybe, cleaned up a bit for Hollywood or something. So I get that. I do believe, though, that she put in the work, and it does show, and that this would ring true to a lot of people that were there. But yes, short of looking at the pictures in the back and seeing actual things. And she said she actually doesn't always like that, because she said she's the type of person who will look first at those pictures, and then that'll kind of like, she can't not look at that, like that'll affect how she sees the descriptions and stuff. And so she kind of fights against that, but she likes having actual historical documents then to kind of go along with all of the research that she did. So yeah, there's a push-pull there, but I totally get it. And I wonder if anyone else feel free to speak to your involvement with nonfiction versus fiction in a story like this, and remind me of what is the power of why, if anyone can answer, tell us why it's better. What's the power of fiction in this case, and not doing just reading an actual, journalistic report of what had happened. Be interested to hear anyone's thoughts on that. Feel free. But I see Ginger B with her hand up. Ginger, can I unmute you? Talk to us.
Yeah. Oh, so much to talk about.
Yeah.
I'll start out by saying I actually really like the short chapters. I'm one of those people that like, I have to get to the end of the chapter. And if I'm interested enough and the chapter's short enough, I will go on to the next chapter, right? Says, oh, it's only one more page. Oh, and then I find myself an hour and a half later, like, oh, and now I just read 150 pages. So I also flew through this book. But it's kind of nice, because if it's longer chapters, then a lot of times I won't on the next chapter, because it just seems like a big job.
Yeah, Ginger, it's like short chapters are like binging shows now, like where the credits, before the credits can go, next episode starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, and my wife's always like, you're not starting another one. I'm like, but it's right here, it's going. I mean, we have to find out what Perry Mason, what happened. So
exactly.
Anyway, yeah.
That said, I found it not just a YA novel, but almost like a younger age, like tween, young teen kind of age group, only because there was so much that was sort of spelled out, right? Like, you could infer a lot, and then in the next page or two, they would say everything explicitly, right? So like, even at the very end where you find out it's the mother, and there's the letter, or the report from the Seiko, and then the very next line is, it was my mother. It's like they have to spell it, like, in case you didn't get it. Like, I'm gonna explain it in very clear terms. So I found that a little annoying, but within probably 15 pages, I'm like, oh, I get it. This is a young age group. Got it. I'm in. I know what to expect. So I wasn't terribly surprised it had like a happy ending. That also tends to happen in some of these kinds of books. And I do want to talk a little bit about Knew the grandfather, because sometimes when I think about people living in these kinds of regimes, oftentimes they don't really know what other people's lives are like, or they don't, necessarily know what they're missing. But in Romania, because the time of that regime was short enough that there was that whole generation that knew another lifestyle, it was well known what a different life could be like. And I thought they did a really good job of explaining that, of like presenting, that this alternative lifestyle is right around the corner, right? And there's this like societal memory of what another lifestyle could be, and that can really just keep that spirit sort of alive in the populace. So I thought that was a really, really good thing. And then finally, I really appreciated the map. I don't know much about Eastern Europe, and I don't necessarily even know which countries were part of the USSR and which were just the Eastern Bloc countries. So I just really appreciated having that there. And when they talked about like Yugoslavia and some of the other countries that were falling during that time, that was just really helpful. I'm like, I get it. Okay, so it's literally all the countries around them they heard the news about. And that really sort of just brought it home for me, because I kept going back to that as they were talking about the other countries that were falling during that time. So that's it.
Yeah, I love. It's nice to have a 1989 overview map. That was a great key to it. That was really cool to have. And that was something that, because I did audio first and then was able to go back and look at the pictures and then look at the map and stuff like that. So that was nice. The short chapter thing definitely, I think, is a thing for readers. It's the classic, one more before bed sort of thing, or just it's like a driveway. I'm gonna keep listening in the car before I get out, like a driveway moment sort of thing, like they talk about with public radio, trying to create those. It's a good technique. I think sometimes it works. I do feel in YA books there are times where it is almost written to, maybe is the author sometimes underestimating the intelligence of the YA reader, even, could it have been edited in a way that doesn't need to be completely spelled out, or is that part of, and I don't know, is that part of the what a publisher really wants to make something that feels like it could be in schools or whatever, like it has to be really clean cut. And I don't know. I get that. I get that it probably could, it at times, I like to read YA that feels like it can cross over and doesn't feel like you're just reading YA. So at the times where it maybe shows that it is written for a younger audience is where it might appeal to someone like us a little bit less. But yeah, thank you, Ginger. All right, Donna, let's go to the notes.
I really appreciated the comments that Ginger and Rebecca made about the YA piece. I think, definitely YA. I think in addition to the short chapters, I think that reinforcement all along, I think authors try to keep in mind that younger readers might not have the time to really keep track from, moment to moment of what they've read. And so there's repetition and so on to keep them engaged. I think the other pieces of YA really that are in this book are the fact that there isn't a lot of gore. I mean, my gosh, a bullet wound and all of the things that could have gone along with that, and describing in more detail the bleeding and the pain and all that, it's pretty tame. And even the romance, of course, there's a romance. There always, romance is always a nice piece in a YA book, but it's handled in a really kind of delicate way, a respectful way, that they clearly had a relationship, but it was kind of tenuous once there were suspicions and so on, but then it all turned out okay. And the fact that he had that notebook, I mean, my gosh, this kid was quite the dreamer, the idealist, and he could write poetry, and he could write apparently essays as well, or other descriptions more specific about what life was like under the regime. And And then to have the notebook actually make its way out of Romania, and then he could hear, excerpts being read over the radio. I mean, it's like, wow. And I mean, it's not just a happy ending. It's just that there's all these wonderful kind of idealistic kinds of things that happen that are really thrilling to read, but, a little bit of coincidence and so on. But I think that, again, with YA, you want a young protagonist. And she talked in interviews. I just really generally don't like historical fiction. I think, Jeff, like you were saying, just give me a documentary. I love, and there are some wonderful writers these days who are doing amazing jobs blending in all of the facts and having everything documented, really almost it's nonfiction, but it almost unfolds like a story because they're so skilled in it. But I think you're right that she redeemed herself. I think that huge list of sources at the end. I mean, my gosh, not only did she do all those interviews, but she has read and, lists pretty much everything available on this topic, and admits that she, for a while, thought about using Nadia Comaneci, the gymnast, as a focus for the story of what's happened in Romania, and realized, no, do a common person. And I have to give her credit then for doing a teenager who, in this composite family, I mean, she had the multiple generations, which is really cool. And she has the parents that aren't necessarily on the same page with each other, but it seems like the dad knew the mom, what she was up to, but he kind of kept silent. And so it kind of raises all those questions, and the brother and sister relationship, which I thought was really interesting and well developed, and suspicions, but they turn out okay. I just think she built a lot of family dynamic kinds of things that kids reading this can really identify with. So I think that was a good move on her part, since, as you were saying, Jeff, this is kind of one of her missions, is to bring to life the kind of experiences untold stories have, and for an audience that can handle it and read it and learn.
She talks about making it human, and for her, it's not about the numbers. It's not about just the facts, laid out. It is making the story human, so that then you feel empathetic. There is something there, and I think I can see how nonfiction or just the hard facts of life in Romania in the 80s, served up to a young adult audience, might not get them too excited, to read it right away. And maybe that's part of why YA historical fiction can be really successful, in the sense that it gets to them on a level of, puts them in the situation. What if it was someone, your age, that's got a sister that, lives with their parents, all this stuff, can you relate to that now? What if we took away, what if you didn't have, the life that you have now, but it was like this, but you're still, a teenage boy, living, in the country and everything. So I think in some ways it's like, a teaspoon of sugar helps the medicine go down. And maybe historical fiction, when done well, is that kind of gateway that then hopefully, readers like us, or people who get really interested in it, will then take that next step of what is it? Like, do you read actual accounts? Do you watch a documentary? Do you do a little bit more? Do you at least get interested enough to search it out, to Google it, to be conversant and familiar with it, and be like, there were 23 million people that were living in Romania that experienced this, this was not something that the rest of the world was talking about as much, and we certainly weren't in America at this time, and for many of us, we're still learning about it. So I think it's it's that little teaspoon of sugar is how I'm going to look at good historical fiction, and then take more medicine on your own. I mean, books and bars, sugar and medicine, and then wash it down with some wine or beer. Right, Mark? Mark, what do you got? What are you drinking?
Yeah, so I can't even imagine having going back to my teenage or tween years and having this book recommended to me. I was so unaware of violence and adult issues in literature. And so even though Donna says it's pretty tame, I can't look at it through that lens as a child and think that I could come to this as a 12-year-old or 11-year-old and really feel like I could get through the whole book without really feeling challenged by it. So this comes from someone who, wasn't introduced to adult fiction until sophomore year of high school, when the Lords of Discipline was given to me by an English teacher who thought I could handle it. So I almost regret that I didn't have librarians and teachers that would encourage me to read something like this as a kid. So even coming at it as an adult, I felt a little weird trying to put myself back in this time, knowing that it was a young adult book. So all aboard with it now that I'm adult, and no real challenges. If I had kids, I'd want my kids to read things like this and be introduced to it. So it's real hard to see like the progression of literature. I know all of this stuff has probably been percolating in the background, but when vampire teen fiction became a thing at Barnes and Noble, and I was like in my 30s, I'm like, what is going on? This can't be something that's good, good in general. And I'm not the informant because, as you can tell, basically by my prefacing my comments, I don't get told a lot of secrets. A lot of people don't confide in me. So I'm usually the one giving information to other people that ends up getting leaked out. So I put the cart before the horse on that one. But I liked this book well enough. I didn't love it. The reason I was challenged by it, there's such an immediacy to the stories that are being told, and especially the violence of the Gulag prison environment where the kids are taken. And then to find out that it's kind of reflected through a lens where he's an adult later. I had a hard time trying to figure out if the first person was probably because it's a young adult book and you want to stay along with the main character the whole time. I almost would have liked to have seen what a third person approach to it might be, to have that same immediacy, but not through the lens of the person telling the story. I did like the dossiers and the things that were presented from a different perspective in terms of providing that kind of different point of view for those pieces that interrupted the main flow of the narrative. And when we were talking about historical fiction, I've just finished Hernan Diaz's Trust, which was a hugely recommended book. It's kind of a cloud atlas type thing in that it tells a story from multiple perspectives through different characters' points of view, and it has historical figures referenced, but the main characters aren't historical themselves. So it's kind of the best blend. I either like nonfiction that is creative to the point where it blurs what's really happening so that I can enjoy it from that perspective, or really well done fiction that this author really did her research. So I super appreciate all of the effort that she put into foundationally making all of the research part of what informed the story. And, takes these huge figures in history and has them as being kind of supplementary background figures to the plot that's happening in the foreground. This came off to me as a young adult version of The Lives of Others, which was a German film that came out about 10 years ago that I thought I had an introduction to this kind of thing through that movie that was really powerful. And then there's a sitcom called Comrade Detective that was done in the 2000s with Romanian actors playing in a crime kind of drama. It's only 6 parts. It's 6 episodes or 8 episodes. It's on Amazon Prime. And then it's dubbed over with American actors speaking over the Romanian language. And it's intended to be like a propaganda series with regard to trying to boost the popularity and visibility of communism. So you're supposed to look at it as if it were made in the 80s and it were dubbed over with English language. So those are my 2 touch points: Trust and Comrade Detective, or Lives of Others, and Comrade Detective came to mind when I was reading this.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I love The Lives of Others. Great movie. I've seen a little bit of Comrade Detective, but what that brings up for me, and I'm glad you touched on this, is how much I was invested in. And I'm pretty sure it's the same person. And if it's not, it's another Eastern Bloc country that had this, but I feel like it's her, the woman who dubs all of the Hollywood American movies is, she does all of them. And it's a real person, and it's someone that Ruta actually interviewed. And I remember seeing, I'm pretty sure there was a news story on her, or some like a short or a documentary on her. And if it wasn't her, and I feel bad, I wish I had done this research ahead of time. I'm gonna figure it out before tomorrow's discussion, and I'll post it. That's fascinating to me, and I loved how, being a huge movie fan that you all know I am, they were looking at stuff like Pretty Woman or Die Hard and being like, this is a fantasy. I mean, like, you can just open a refrigerator and there's whatever you want to eat is in there. You turn on the faucet and water comes out and it's hot or cold. You can decide, and you don't have to wait in line for all these, and this idea of, I mean, Hollywood has always been like, the dream factory, but for an entire country, to be looking at this and to all be watching this same, the same dub by this same woman who is, interpreting all of these dreams for them, basically, and showing them that this is what's happening in other parts of the world, and they can't even believe it. But that gave them something, some hope, something to look at, or something maybe even to find out if it's real or not. And Mark, you gave me a great idea, a better way to modify this. So the informant will be the last person that actually speaks. So, because what you said is, a few of you have said, I'm not the informant. So if you come on right now and say, I'm not the informant, I will believe you. But once 10 or 11 people say they're not the informant, guess what? Number 12, number 13, I don't think you might be the informant. So there's an incentive to raise your hand now and tell me that you are not the informant, and I will believe you. But by the time I get to the last person to say that, I don't know if I can believe you, because what took you so long? Because you are the informant. Susan, are you the informant?
Yes, I'm the informant, because who would think I was? I had a former coworker and I who thought we would be great CIA agents because no one would suspect us.
And where does this coworker work now?
I think she's retired. Who knows? She
Okay.
could be in the CIA right now.
As far as you know, yeah.
Yes. So anyway, I read another Ruta novel a few years ago, and I got all the way through before I realized it was a young adult. And I don't read that many, so so I think that one was harder to tell that it was a young adult book, at least in my mind. This one seemed more like it was. But again, in that first one, I think it was Salt to the Sea. She again did a ton of research, and it was World War II studying refugees. And I can't say more because that would spoil it, but it was a historical event that she was writing about. So I recommend her stuff. It's good. And as you were saying, the thing that stuck with me, relating to the movies, and I'm, thinking that was all a fantasy. It was when he went, befriended the ambassador's son, and saw the video from his friends in America, that it clicked that no, that was real.
Yeah.
That they could open a refrigerator and have all this food in it. So until he saw real people living that way, that's when it clicked that, oh, there's a different world out there, and we're not even close to living it. So. And yes, I am the informant.
Thanks, Sue. That doesn't mean there's not another one, because
Yeah,
that you just might be covering. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're probably the mastermind. You're the one that this informant is reporting to, and you're trying to keep them safe right now just by admitting it yourself. But you know what? This Maggie Polston could be an informant. We're about to find out what Maggie has to say. Because first of all, her image says V. It says V with her picture, and her name says Maggie Polston. but there's a V. I'm very excited to find out what this V Maggie has to say. Talk to us.
Well, yeah, I'm not the informant. I'm just using my mom's account. So her name's Veronica.
Maggie, are you a YA reader?
I am.
Are you a YA yourself?
I am also. Yes.
Excellent. Do you mind telling us how old you are? Just so
I'm
I know.
14.
Okay. Well, thank you for representing and being in our discussion. Maggie, we're excited to hear what you have to say. Talk to us. Or Veronica.
Yeah, my librarian recommended it to me, and I found it really interesting. I read most of Ruta's other books, and I really liked them. And this was definitely a lot lighter than her other stuff.
Oh, really?
Especially Salt to the Sea. It was a lot heavier in a lot of the subjects they touched on.
Wow.
But I think it was still really good. I definitely agree. It was definitely for a younger audience. Her past books were more teens. This one was definitely more of a tween book.
Huh.
And I think it's really important, like going back to like the fiction versus nonfiction. I think it's important to read fiction of historical events, like historical fiction, because it humanizes the people living there. You don't just see the numbers or like the main story of Anne and hiding in the attic, and the people who made it out. You see people who were regular everyday people who maybe didn't make it out or weren't super lucky. And I think it's just really interesting and humanizes everyone. You get to see the regular everyday person.
That's a great point. Thanks, Maggie. I'm so glad that you joined our discussion tonight, and that you are the resident Ruta expert. It sounds like you've read maybe more than the rest of us have by her. You're saying that her stuff is usually darker and maybe even aimed toward a slightly older teen audience. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting because with the protagonist of this being 17, but yet it feels like it was maybe aimed at more of like the younger sibling of the 17-year-old, not so much, even though it's told from his perspective.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. And I think your points are great about thank you for defending why we should still read fiction and how it humanizes. And I really do think that's what the author, that's part of what she is trying to do here. She has talked about how it is important to get us to empathize with the characters and to feel, to really put like a face and a name, a person that you care about with it, and put yourselves in their situation. And that's also maybe a reason why it's told in the first person. Thanks, Maggie. Maggie, where are you calling from?
I'm in Hopkins.
Excellent. Okay, well, you're local. Everyone that's local, don't forget, we are meeting in person tomorrow at Urban Growler, and young people can come with an adult. They're cool about that. It's not just a bar, it's a brewery, it's a restaurant. So if anyone's around the St. Paul area, we'll be discussing this in person tomorrow at 6:30 at Urban Growler. And I should mention, if anyone's from south of the river area or likes to go take a little trip down to Lakeville, we're doing a special event with the libraries down in Lakeville, the Heritage Library. And we're going to be at Angry Inch Brewery on the final Wednesday the 29th, also talking about this book with their library group. So it's an additional one that they reached out, and Ruta, I believe, is coming to their library like a week or so later to do an event. So we're kind of getting people excited and fired up about seeing and meeting here. So Maggie, if you are a fan of her work, check with the Heritage Library in Lakeville. They're hosting her. She'll be coming and doing an event down there. Maybe you already know about it. I see Rebecca has her hand back up. Rebecca, talk to us. How's the sketch coming?
It's going well.
Good.
And I disagree that Susan is the informant. I think she's just trying to throw us off the track. I really do.
I like that this is like we're playing a bluffing game a little bit. Like it's kind of like a callback to our last discussion.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's One Night Ultimate Werewolf or Mafia. We're trying to find out like, yeah, who the werewolf is or who the informant is. This is good.
I wanted to just say something one of the other smart people said made me, I stopped at one point because they gave a specific, it was like the last days of December of 1989. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I had to stop and think where I was. And you were not even around, Maggie, yet. I was 29, so that gives away my age. I was living a very, I want to use the word frivolous, but it was very me focused life. I was in Key West, Florida. I was working at a hotel. I made more money than I needed to at the time. So I had spending money. I mean, bad things were happening. The AIDS epidemic was devastating the population in Key West and other places. And it wasn't, I'm not trying to say that we didn't have worries, but I really just remember the whole all of the Berlin, the Iron Curtain, all of that as just background. I was not a very good informed citizen, and I don't know whether that's true of all cities or states or countries or whatever, but anyway, now fast forward to today, and I am someone who spends a lot of time doing frivolous things, but one of my favorite people is a Romanian YouTuber, and it's a young woman, I would say 30s, and she has incredible skills at doing bushwhacking and building of stuff, and I am so soothed by her, I don't know, competence, I guess is the right word. And you can see that she doesn't go into the cities or the towns, so you don't really get a sense of that, but you get a sense of the countryside and how beautiful it is, and how often the tool she is using is US stuff. Her fridge is full now and all that sort of thing. So the change has happened, at least in her life, but there's still a very great difference in her life and my life. And I appreciate that I am now in an age of technology where I can, in a sense, go and see a single person in another country doing their everyday things. And I think there's a lot of horrible stuff that's come out of social media, but I do think it's going to be harder for us to have the kind of ignorance that that I had when I was a younger person. And so I'm hoping, Maggie, that for your future, as social media continues to, I don't know, inform, but also obscure, because there is that, that there are ways to really directly connect with people. And now I'm going to go write a comment on that YouTuber.
Thank you. And I think, wait, I don't know if I misheard you. Did you say competence, or did you say another word that
No, competence. I really like people who can do things well, and it's soothing for me. So either if they're drawing or if they're whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that's a great point about how it is fun for anyone to think back to where you were in 1989, specifically at the end of 89, and what, if you can remember what was going on, if you were alive, and how you reacted to it. I mean, when I think of, it's funny when you say that, Rebecca. I mean, I think when I remember how important the Berlin Wall falling was, but part of my frame of reference for that also was, I feel like it was served up to me by like MTV and like U2. Like, I think in terms of like important artists of the time, like Bono and U2, and I'm thinking about them a lot lately because of St. Patrick's Day, and because there's this new documentary of David Letterman, and they go back to Ireland and they redo all their songs. They have all their 40 new versions of their classic songs. So they've been on my mind, but I think specifically of Achtung Baby, and that was recorded in Berlin, and how that was like such a big deal of like, just, those early 90s, everything was, post, Berlin Wall falling and stuff. And that's kind of my frame of reference for it. But I did find, I'm excited, it is Margarita Nistor, and I put this in the chat, and the documentary is called Chuck Norris versus Communism. This is the person. This is the actual person, I'm quite certain. She's the one, she secretly dubbed over 3,000 banned movie titles on VHS tapes in Romania. And so I posted a little Wikipedia on her. And if you've ever seen it, it might be on Netflix. I'm not sure. I'll find out where it is. Chuck Norris versus Communism. It's a great title. And it's because she dubbed some Chuck Norris movies. But it's, I don't know. To me, if you want a nice, that's one way to really follow this up. You want to see a little bit more about this, is check that out. It was from 2015, this documentary. And if I go to my trusty site and app called justwatch.com, and I enter Chuck Norris versus Communism, I'm going to tell you where you can watch it right now. And then, you know how you talk about something to watch and people are like, yeah, but I don't know if I have that or not. You're about to find out. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. Just watch. Free ads here on Books and Bars. I get nothing from them, although I would like to someday. If you're not using it, you absolutely should, because we have these conversations and then we just don't know how to watch what people tell us to watch. And so let's find out. Anyone who want to take a guess? Guess what? Oh my gosh, the worst case scenario. It's not streaming at the moment. So now I have to tell them, notify me when it's available. So this is like, oh, you know what? You might be able to find it on YouTube. There's tons of clips here. So anyway, Chuck Norris versus Communism. Check out the Wikipedia page. You can read more about the actual woman who dubbed all of those. Fascinating person and job to me. So I think that's really cool. Let's see. Allie's got her hand up. Talk to us, Allie.
I was the tender age of 5 in 1989, so I don't have any memories of this time. So sort of like one of those things where it's like important because you were alive, so it's an important thing. But a little hazy in my it's just sort of like what I learned in high school or whatever. I think one of the things that's like really stuck with me when you talked about that video with the refrigerator is like when they talked about the banana.
Yeah.
And they were just like in awe of this banana, just like it like blew their mind. And I felt like the author did a really fabulous job. And I think that's just one of the gifts of fiction or, historical fiction, is to like bring it to life with just like this image of the banana. And I was like watching my daughter just marvel at this banana. Like, I love this banana. And like, I don't know, it just brought this sense of like wonder of all of the things we do have. And kind of thinking about what Rebecca said too, it made me think a lot about what I don't know about. There's a lot of things we don't know in the world, but like what are the things that people are marveling at, right? Like, what situations are folks in? Are there so it kind of like made me a little but also gave me hope. I don't know. Both of those things can be true, right? It made me want to be informed, and sometimes in a world that comes at us so fast and you like don't know where to stream things because there's so many options, it's hard to figure out the best way to be informed and compassionate and engaged without totally burning yourself out. And it made me think a lot about that, which I think is great. And I would definitely look at her other work too to learn about other times, thanks to Maggie's recommendation too.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. How do you guys find how do you stay informed without getting burned out these days about something like this? And what did this book make you feel? Did it make you want to explore other topics, learn more about something here? What did it evoke in you? Anyone else want to talk about feelings they had about it, about the writing style, about the characters, the story, anything. Feel free to bring it up. Love to hear from you, especially if you're the informant and haven't spoken yet. I'm looking at a few of you. You know who you are. Just kidding. You don't have to talk. If you want to, I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I talk more, So some other stuff that I learned in researching this, there was the story that she told a lot that really affected her was sitting down to interview someone, and the first thing the person did was looking around the table and picks up an ashtray, turns it over and looks and makes sure that there's not a recording device. And she's like, I'm sorry, this is many years later, but she is still, compulsively checking for recording devices in places where she is talking, especially about her past. And that was something like just a visual and just a visceral moment that Ruta experienced just talking to this person, how this person can't, just start having a conversation, but has to make sure that it doesn't feel like she's being spied on and being recorded. And I think, an interesting juxtaposition of that is we are actually just giving all of that away now to corporations. It might not be the state per se, but our phones are listening to us. Google is tracking us. It's funny when old stories about things about trying to stop someone from tracking you, and it's like we just give it all away for free now, right? I mean, this is a sort of a big tech question, but that's part of what you sign up for when you sign up for social media. So anyone, I see some hands again, but just things to think about. So Donna, talk to us.
Yeah, just a couple quick things. One thing that I was really intrigued by was the use of Kent cigarettes in so many situations in this novel. And apparently that is based on fact. I mean, she even had a photo of a package of Kent cigarettes, and my mother smoked Kent cigarettes. I mean, it just brought back, I could picture those packs all over the place and how much she kind of, treasured those and kind of kept them in certain places. And when my youngest brother was a teenager, he convinced her to stop smoking. So then she just threw them all away and was done. So that I was really proud of her for that. But anyway, I thought that was just so interesting that cigarettes and the particular brand apparently were just really important to have on hand for no matter who you needed to bribe or whatever. They were just kind of your ticket for that. And the other thing I wanted to quickly comment on was the title. I thought I Must Betray You was really an indicator of how trapped they felt in their situation and how they almost felt like they didn't have a choice. I mean, when you think of Cece, the sister, and how she was really caught in a situation where she knew a lot that was going on, but apparently he finds out later that she had really done a lot of the things she had done because she was kind of a double agent, betraying both sides, because that was her way of what she thought was going to happen, which would be to get passports for her and her brother to get out of Romania and go to Canada or the US. And, they all were trying to protect their loved ones or find a better life for their loved ones. These amazingly difficult situations that they felt like they had to do what they agreed to do because it was so hopeless of a situation. So given all of that, then the euphoria that they felt when they realized they started to hear about these uprisings in other parts of the other countries and how, hey, you know what? We do have power. I mean, it was very encouraging. I think a young person reading this, what I hope would be the case, would be that they would realize that, yes, I mean, they're taking the voice that you have and getting with other people and making your views known and gathering together, and then seeing the photos of this actual situation, you know, that, I mean, it did happen, that they were able to be successful with this and getting rid of that regime. And wow, I mean, I just think that is a very powerful message for young people. And I thought, given the pessimism of the title, there was coming out of that a real positive message.
Yeah, I think it was a really good title. Ruta has talked about how she doesn't, as an author, always have control of the title of the book, especially once it gets published in other languages. Oftentimes it's retitled to something that fits for that, and sometimes not always in the best way. But I felt that is a strong title. Thank you, Donna, for confirming what a lot of us thought. We now know that it is in fact you who are the informant, because you have all the Kent cigarettes, and you have been doling them out very sparingly to your minions and to get all of the information, because no one else talked about having Kent cigarettes tonight. But you know, Donna, in the year of our Lord 2023, the fact that you are still just smoking a heater, having a Kent in the dugout while you're waiting to Kent, of all things. I mean, yeah, I was never a smoker. I did have a parent who had the occasional cigarette, but Kent was never, I don't know, like Kent was the name of a bike. Do you remember that? Kent made some bikes that it wasn't like a great brand. It was probably like Huffy, or not even as good as Huffy, but I think I had a Kent bike. And God, I hope it wasn't made by like Philip Morris or something. Now I think about it, I don't know why the bike was called Kent. Something else to look up, But anyway, great details. Thanks for sharing. And I see that we have Rebecca. Rebecca, talk to us.
Well, I am just so glad that I came behind Donna, because I was about to talk about the cigarettes too. So therefore, I'm not the informant, obviously. No, that was a very strong thing, because cigarette culture was in the 1989 so prevalent, so much a part of your daily life interactions with others. You know, it really is amazing how completely that has almost gone away. I mean, when I see somebody having a cigarette now, I'm like, you know, it feels very alien. It's almost like worse than smoking pot, or, you know, some other kind of thing. It's so different. But if the zombies are coming, or if there's a what's it called, an asteroid on its way to demolish us, I'm gonna go get me some, not Kent's, but I'm gonna get some Benson and Hedges Menthol Deluxe Ultra Light 100s, which was my brand. It was the longest freaking name anyway.
Wow.
I don't miss that time at all. Cigarette smoking was something that was expensive, not as much as now, but I can see why it became currency, though, because it was just such a common denominator. Everybody would have been smoking. Maybe not the teenagers yet, but every adult, and it would have been something very hard. And I'm mystified as to why that brand too. That would be another detail that would be interesting to find out. Why was it manufactured close by? Was it something, you know, because as far as I know, tobacco wasn't produced in Europe, but I don't know. I'm so ignorant, it's hard to know. Anyway, I just wanted to say that I did enjoy looking back at a time when connecting with people who did things, important things. And I guess, as you were saying, Donna, that it is possible even now. I started out with something kind of negative about current things, you know, in my previous comment. I do hope that the young people save us.
Yeah, I do too. And I feel that there are many times when I do see in a younger person that they seem smarter, they seem like they've learned a lesson, or that, they care about things more. They're not going to make maybe the same mistakes as the people before them. I think it's interesting when you read about how generation today, just entering the workforce, really cares a lot about who they work for and what like the mission of a company is, maybe somewhat more than just making the most amount of money. They actually care about what they're doing, is for a place that, is not causing more harm in the world and is actually trying to make things better. And I don't know, I'm not saying, I don't know that it's completely true across the board, but I've been reading about this, and I know, one of the places that I work for is definitely a place like that, where it's a mission driven place where people like want to be there because they believe in what the place is doing, and the goals and the future that it is trying to build, versus just, trying to get the next pack of Kents. But there's still people that vape a lot. There's a lot of secret vapors out there. That's the new thing, right? And then they make it in like candy flavors to try to get the kids going on it. So, Mark, you're a master candy vapor. Tell us about it.
No, I am not the candy vapor, but I am in Oregon, where it probably is more villainous to smoke a cigarette than it is to smoke pot. So, and it bringing up that the long name for the cigarette, calls to mind when Starbucks has all these long names that you just rattle off. I think they thought maybe that generational call at the counter at the convenience store for cigarettes could transfer easily to the Starbucks world, where you can just rattle off 15 adjectives and then end it with the drink. I wanted to mention, as we turn into a little bit more of the darker side of the conversation here, in terms of trying to find the hope with some of the things that are going on. It's tricky to put myself in a position of someone who feels so desperate that they have to move in these directions to get their freedom and democracy and everything else. And it's against this backdrop of us living in the 21st century, where things can seem pretty grim. So I limit my news exposure, because I do feel like that we're on something of a slide, but it's all relative. Like, you look at something like this situation, which seems completely foreign, but then you see signals that are like hinting toward narrower and narrower and narrower rights for people and challenges with everything that goes on. I do wonder what it would take for me in a situation like that to actually go from being a protester who's willing to be there to support people to actually become violent. If it's not an immediate self-defense thing, what has you making that turn? And, I feel badly for the younger generation that's in a position to have to deal with active first time I'd heard run, hide, fight with fight at the end of the call for what you should do in a shooting situation. I didn't know that fight was the end of that recommendation. When the Michigan State thing happened earlier this year, or late last year, I didn't know fight was part of the advice. So I feel badly for them. And at the same time, literature like this calls attention to how would you deal with situations, whether it's in that particular situation that those people were in or where you are now. I thought the author did a good job showing kind of gradations of different characters in terms of their approaches to things. But it was, again, against the backdrop of how connected they were to the espionage that was going on, right? So the mom didn't want anyone to do anything, but she was also in cahoots with what was going on. So yeah, tricky dynamics all along. So
yeah, it definitely hits close to home, and really tricky when you're talking about high school students now, not doing a fire drill, but doing an active shooter drill at school and practicing, what the process is for that, in the school, practicing, lockdown protocols and stuff, really scary stuff. I mean, I think of, stuff that parents and grandparents talked about, where, they would go under a desk for fear of nuclear war, and how comical the thought of that is, that, sitting under your desk back in the 50s was going to possibly somehow stop you from getting hurt by a bomb being dropped on your city. But yeah, it's definitely, it's a changing time. And I think it's important that and really great for us to look back. And one of the things that one of the takeaways from something like this is, so as not to repeat. I mean, what other than making history human and really putting us in this first person perspective and showing us what's going on in Romania. I mean, I can't not also think of what's going on currently in Russia and Ukraine by reading something like this. I mean, these things repeat, and it's not exactly the same. It's not a one-to-one, but it feels like, at any point, with someone like, Putin, I mean, you're looking at another Ceausescu type of leader that you definitely do not want to take your eye off of, and make sure that we don't allow places like Ukraine to fall to him. Ginger, thanks for raising your hand again.
Yeah, I was thinking about kind of that character arc that Christian had, and how it's just so common, right? That in these kinds of situations, we start with the thought that there's like the good guys and the bad guys, and it's very clear, right? Of like, Christian had, people that he trusted and cared about, and those were the good people. And then there were like the reporters in his building were clearly the bad people. And throughout the rest of the novel, then we started to see those lines blur, right? And the fact, even the name, right? I must betray you. Like, all of these people were participating under duress, and those lines between good and bad, and good and evil get blended. And I think that's just such an important lesson for all of us in society, right? Because it's so easy for people to think about us versus them in a lot of contexts, and the others are
Yes.
also just people who have come to where they are in life through a variety of circumstances, some within their control and some without. But it kind of, I really liked that lesson, especially for kind of the YA context, is helping especially kids take that arc. And I think that's a lesson that so many in society, because so much of our world is sort of bifurcated into groups right now, that I think that's just a great lesson for all of us to sort of think about. Made me think about it during this discussion tonight. So thank you.
Thanks, Ginger. It's a great point. I think another thing that is accomplished here is this idea that an American teen could read this, or anywhere a teen could read this and say, I'm more alike. I'm more similar to this teenager in this situation than I am different. There are more things that that connect us than separate us. And I would, what would I do in this situation? I think that's one of the questions that this really poses. If you can put yourself in this person's shoes. Ruta talks about how she wanted to create this almost like first person GoPro connected to the head kind of feeling of this book. So that really does throw you right into it. And, hopefully for young adults reading today, something like this can open their eyes to, and not just thinking, oh, well, this was just in the past, but do see connections to what is happening today in certain parts of the world. Allie brings up, I don't know if you guys see this in the chat or if it's just to me, but talking about next month's book is it's The Candy House by Jennifer Egan. And it is not a direct sequel to A Visit from the Goon Squad, but there are characters that similar in the way that when we read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and there were characters that are in some of her other books. Taylor Jenkins Reid, some connections to Daisy Jones and to some other Malibu Rising and some of her others. You don't need to read Goon Squad if you haven't to appreciate the Candy House next month's book. I remember very well when we read Goon Squad years ago for Books and Bars, and it was a favorite of that year. And so I do think it's a great book and well worth reading if you haven't. It's a bit older now. And there are some fun connections. There are things you could read online. You could just, to see like what the connections are, similar to how you code for like a Taylor Jenkins Reid book. But if you have the time and you're interested, and it would not even matter, and Egan has talked about this and written about this, for you to read Candy House first and then read Goon Squad if you like Candy House. But she isn't looking for you to connect all the dots or to find the puzzle pieces or to say like, or you're not going to understand it if you don't understand that this person is that person's grandfather, that sort of a thing. But there are some connections like that. Candy House reads a bit like short stories that have connections to each other, and not that it makes like one whole big novelistic story, because there are very different stories that you're kind of like, I don't know if I see the connection right away between the next one, but sometimes you'll read one a couple stories later and be like, oh, okay, this is referring to what happened in that earlier part, that earlier story in the book and stuff like that. And that does make it fun and kind of rich. And it is kind of, if you don't catch it right away, I think it'll be a fun part of our discussion. I know for my wife and I, we were like, oh, okay, that's, now I get it. That's cool. Like, and that added to it. I really liked it. There were some amazing stories, some like a couple back to back that I was like, this is as good as anything I've read this year. And then there are other stories that are like, okay, like I didn't like that one as much, but I'm interested to see, so that is that person's brother or whatever. Let's see what else happens. So that's the Candy House. It deals with a really interesting piece of technology. It's not like a sci-fi futuristic book, but it's the idea of if we could share like the collective consciousness, like like I earlier talked about how we just give things up to social media for a price, this takes it to the next step. And there's this technology, and a lot of the book takes place like 10-15 years in the future, where what if you could kind of share your first person perspectives, your memories with other people, and you just kind of, the whole world could tap into it, sort of thing. That's kind of the background of it. That's not like what the book is about, but that's like someone invents that, and that is kind of invented in the Goon Squad, in that first book. And then it's explored more, like it's out there, this thing, when we read the stories of Candy House. I don't want to scare you off if you haven't read Goon Squad, which is to say, seriously, you could just read Candy House and be totally fine. It's not a direct sequel. However, you guys did vote for it. So there are enough of you that picked it as one that you wanted to read, and so hopefully that means you either like Goon Squad or you've heard good things about it, and you want to give it a shot anyway. So please do. April 18th is the next Zoom. I put the invite in there. Why don't I just give it to you again? And I'm doing this new thing where I sent the newsletter out just yesterday. So hopefully you guys saw it and got it there. I mean, you're here, and that way you would have the links fresher. But I want to send out maybe an earlier newsletter, and then I'll send it out again with the links closer to the event. But here is the link for the next Zoom. But we're also going to meet in person then on the Wednesday, the day after. That's the Wednesday, the 19th of April at Urban Growler again. So Tuesday, April 18th is the Zoom for Candy House, and Wednesday, April 19th is in person at Urban Growler. I don't want to cut anybody off. So is there anything that we really didn't touch on that you want to hear us discuss on tonight's book? Or do you just want to show up tomorrow and be an informant? Bring an ashtray with your phone records things. Just put it under there. You can record the conversation, and it'll be great. Anyone else on Ruta or tonight's book? And hey, if you want to come to the event, the library event, it's at Angry Inch Brewery in Lakeville. That's the 29th. Feel free to come. It'll be a whole new group of people. It won't be Books and Bars people, but they could become Books and Bars people later. This is the thing. This is the thought, right? So hopefully we'll get some people from Lakeville coming. Bring some Kent cigarettes. You can trade them. The people from Lakeville, they can't get them down there. So Kent doesn't travel south of the river. So bring those. Anything else? Any other questions, comments, anything? Thank you guys so much. This was fun. I hope you had a good time. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And I will see you either tomorrow or next week or next month. Either way, good night.